Welcome to part 2 of lesson 34, traditional model. In the previous part, we showed you some before and after of alterations that we are going to do on our traditional model. In this part, we're going to make those changes onto our paper pattern. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. If you haven't seen part 1, go back, watch the lesson, and then continue on with this part. All right, let's begin. You can already see that the lapel section. So we are now ready to make the changes on our paper pattern. To do this, we're going to need a few tools. First of all, you need a good marking tool. You can use chalk to mark freehand lines on your paper pattern. You can use graphite to do the same, but then with a dark gray line. You can use colored pastel pencils. Sometimes you have to use a colored pencil, not necessarily pastel, but this has a chalk-like quality to it, or the thicker black version of that. I sometimes use a pen for fine, thin lines. Of course, you need paper scissors, but you also need good rulers. Now, this is one of my favorite inch rulers. It's an inch wide, so it's very handy to use, but it also has centimeters and inch imperial measures. However, metal rulers, as great as they are, they reflect light quite a lot. And if you're making long hours, and for example, you're having a bigger square, this reflection can really irritate your eye. Now, we have created a fantastic set of rulers made from matte acrylic. They are according to the shapes that we have on our website, which you can actually download, just print on paper and use them. But these are from flexible acrylic. They bend. They don't break easily, even though if you try, you can break them, I think, but you know, they're pretty flexible. And they have the most common curves that you really need. Okay? Now, I recommend you get these because we're going to use these in module 2 to draw some permanent colors. But the fantastic thing about these is that they don't really reflect light in your eye as the metal rulers do. Also, if you're using these rulers for drawing, for example, templates, or you're making block patterns, they allow you to have consistent lines that look professional. I use this for all my personal professional work, not just the ISOT material, okay? Of course, with marking comes also erasing, so a good eraser is also welcome, and you're going to need some tape. I'm using masking tape with a bit more adhesive because I can draw on it and it doesn't reflect light, so it's not going to irritate your eyes. But usually when I'm working, I use these transparent ones as well. These are cheaper, of course. These are a lot more expensive, and you don't really want to make your project more expensive than it should be, okay? So, that being said, before we actually begin making any changes on our paper pattern, I want you to be aware of the quality of your lines. What do I mean by that? Well, you're going to make some lines, and when you're making these lines, you need to make decent lines. If you're using, for example, a curved ruler, it's very easy to make a smooth curve because the ruler allows you to do so. And you can duplicate that, or you can use chalk to do the same. However, sometimes you are required to make curves that your ruler doesn't allow you to make. Now, imagine you're working on some sort of a side seam, and perhaps I can use this. And you have one line going this way and another line going that way, and you have to connect these with a smooth curve. Now, usually you can just use one of these curved rulers and mark a curve. But if the curve is a lot more complex, you have to do this by hand. When you are making curves by hand, what I want you to do is to always use something that is stable. It's very difficult to make a smooth curve with the tip of a pencil, although I could do that, like so, because I have practiced drawing lines. But having something like a chalk or a graphite allows you to lean in, make short movements, and have cleaner lines, okay? So when I talk about clean lines, I really want you to make connections that are smooth. Don't give me lines like this. Not like this. okay? It's very important that you make the smooth lines. Let's get on with making the changes on our paper pattern. We have about 18 changes to make on our pattern. Let's go through them one by one. First, we drop the back. Then we open the chest. We then displace the underarm seam forwards at the top to 0 at the bottom. We then straightened the curve on the side panel's side seam. We then countered that by letting out the front underarm seam. We then took in the side seams again, this time on the double, the back and the side panel. And we countered that again by letting out the front underarm seam. We then took in the waist on the double, on the side seam of the back and the side panel. We then countered the pulling effect that alteration gave by slashing and closing the front panel. We then let out the front scye and the side body scye around the deepest part, and we also raised the armhole. And then we proceeded by taking in the sleeves on the top of the hindarm to 0 at the elbow. We then let out the elbow and the cuffs. We then corrected the undersleeve curve. Then we let out the suppression on the underarm seam on the double, so both on the front and the side panel. Then we took in the top of the side panel 1 inch into 0 at the chest. We marked our new pitch marks for the sleeves on the armhole. There are going to be 2 additional changes that we're going to make on our pattern, and this is to consider the construction of the garment, which we didn't cover in the video, but we are going to do once we're almost done. The first one is going to be letting out the back side seam and the front underarm seam 3 millimeters all the way through to 0 at the shoulder points. And the second one is going to be remarking the break line on our pattern according to the corrected break line that we have on our jacket. If you have purchased your purple box, inside the box will be a piece of folded blank paper that says "Do not use until further instructions." We are going to use this blank paper to add extra pieces to our pattern in the areas that we have let out. Okay? Now, if you're using your own paper, I recommend you choose something that is thin enough for you to be able to make folds in it. If you're making your patterns on a very heavy card, it's going to be extremely difficult to make folds in it, and it's not going to be a good experience. Let's begin by unfolding this paper and pressing it smooth and flat. I recommend you lay the paper so that you have the shorter side of the paper facing you from left to right. What we are going to do is we are going to cut out wide strips that we are going to attach to our existing pattern, and this wide strip is just an extension that allows us to increase, for example, the distance between the edge and the new line, and so on and so forth. The sizes of these strips vary. Sometimes they are about 2 inches, sometimes 3 inches, but that should not be your concern. What you should understand is we just need the strip to give us enough area to add new lines and to cover enough area at the back of the pattern so that we can tape it to the pattern. Okay? Well, let's begin with our first alteration, which is going to be dropping the back. First, let's establish the square that we want to cut out so that we can extend our pattern. Leave a little bit of room, about 1 inch from the edge. Get close to the other edge on your left and roughly mark out a rectangle, like so, that is about 2 inches below the edges of our pattern. So this would continue into here, and that's really the piece that we need. Cut this piece out. Then take your back pattern, place it somewhere in the middle, mark a straight line above your neck point. So where my neck point is, I'll make a dot there. I'll just mark a light straight line downwards. Place your pattern on the paper again. Trace the outline of the shoulder point the back shoulder, the back neck, and a little bit of the center back. And I'm doing this while the point of the neck point edge on the pattern is on the straight line. We are going to move this pattern down, and we keep the corner that we have here on this line. This ensures that we shift the pattern straight down and don't make sideways movements, changing the position of the neck point, okay? So when you move down, measure 5/8 from your drawn edge to the edge of your pattern. 5/8, 5/8, 5/8. And once you're done, hold it in place, take a piece of tape, just put one there temporarily, flip it over, tape the entire back. Don't hold the tape too tight, for you might contract the paper and that will distort it. You can remove this one, take a longer piece of tape, attach it over the edge. So the edge cannot be lifted up anymore, okay? So that's 1, 2, 3, okay? Now, you have your shoulder end, which isn't connecting to anything. Just connect that to somewhere midway your back scye. So your new shoulder point, the one that you've drawn, like that. If I would go over my lines just to make them visible for you, this is how our new alteration looks. Go ahead and cut out the new line. We have now dropped the back by 5/8. Let's continue to the next alteration. One thing that I want to tell you is that I'm going to be going through these alterations one by one. Now, normally, I would make all the changes that are happening on the same seam just one time. So, for example, if I have been letting out the seam and then taking it in again and then letting it out again, I won't make 3 different strips on the side seams and make the changes. I'll just calculate what the end result is, and then I'll just attach one piece of paper and I'll go for that number. I'm not going to attach 3 strips and go back and forth. But for you to understand what I'm doing and learn from this as clearly as possible, I'll go through them one by one. Next. The next alteration that we made was slash and spreading the chest. To do this, we need a new strip of paper. So, grab your paper, lay your pattern on so that you know how long your strip should be, and your strip should be about 2.5 inches, just enough for you to cover the back of the chest. I'll go from here all the way through here, like that, and cut this piece out. Then I'm going to put my front pattern on this strip so that the chest line is midway our blank strip. Then I'm going to cut through the chest line only, so not through the strip, okay? Only through the paper pattern, through the chest line, and I'm going to leave a little bit uncut, maybe like 3 millimeters at the end. This is the slash. Now we have to do the spread. To do the spread, we're going to keep this in place, maybe bring it slightly higher, and then lower the lower part of the front panel until you have an opening of 1 inch right on the edge of the lapel, like that. Once you have it, hold it in place, grab a new piece of tape, close one end in the middle, right here, just to be sure that nothing opens up any more than you want it. Then flip the pattern and tape both edges. Then turn it around again. You can remove the old tape. Do it carefully so that you don't tear your paper pattern. And just try to use one piece of tape or just 2 narrower tapes so that you don't have excessive taping. I have to add a new piece here because the tape is not wide enough. Once you have that, you're going to mark your new chest line, which is the lower edge of your cut, not the upper edge. Cut out the remaining pieces of paper and tape. When you cut out this edge, you can just connect one end to the other, but don't worry about this lapel edge too much. We're going to correct it at the end. If you remember, I said that the chest line and the center front line are always perpendicular. And because we are using the lower edge of the cut, and that cut is connected to the center front line on the lower half of the forepart, we are just going to continue this center front all the way to the bottom and discard the old one, which is now on an angle, like that. And I'm going to scribble through the old center front line so that I'm not confused and accidentally mark this when I'm marking it on paper. Now we have kept the upper part of the forepart in the same place, just lowered the front, and since we used the lower cut as our chest line and that was perpendicular to the center front of the lower half of the forepart, we therefore continued this upwards so that now the entire center front and our new chest line is perpendicular to one another. Let's move on to the next alteration, which is going to be displacing the underarm seam forwards by 1 inch at the top to 0 at the bottom. To do this, we need our front panel and our side panel. So the idea is that we let out the underarm seam on the side panel into 0 at the bottom and take in the underarm seam on the front panel into 0 at the bottom. This doesn't change the size, just shifts the seam forwards. So grab your blank paper, cut this out so you just get a clean edge, but keep the paper, we're going to use it for other parts. So we're going to begin by letting out the underarm seam on the side panel. To do this, lay your pattern on top, mark out the piece of rectangle strip that you need. We just need about 2 inches here at the bottom, roughly like this. And we need about maybe 3 inches on this side, like that. And if I would connect this line to this line, I might as well just cut out a straight strip, like so. Cut out this entire piece. Lay your side panel on it so that the top of the underarm seam is close to the edge, maybe a quarter away from it. The base can just remain somewhere in the middle. Hold it in place and trace this underarm seam from bottom to top. And trace a little bit of the base of the armhole, like that. Then hold the bottom in the same place and let out the top by 1 inch. So you're using the same curve that you have, but you're just letting out. So that's 1 inch. Hold it in place, put a temporary tape right there, and another one somewhere down the bottom. Flip this over, tape the long edge, turn it over again, remove your temporary tapes, and tape the long edge once more. Sometimes if you have to follow a curve, it's perfectly fine to just move this over, make a small pleat right there, and continue following the curve. And you can go the opposite direction as well, like that. Then all you have to do is to cut out your new edge. Cut just a straight line as a continuation of the armhole. We're going to deal with the armhole slightly later. Okay, so this is now our underarm seam let out. We now have to take in the underarm seam on the front panel. How do we do this? First thing we have to do is to cut through the pocket cut right here up to the center line of the dart. So that's the middle dot that you have at the base of the dart, like so. We now have to close the dart so that this step continues into the hip. For that, we are going to fold one dart leg up to the intake line of the dart, and then we're going to fold this onto the other dart leg. So the left leg goes onto the right leg, like that. Now, for the rest, you don't have to fold it into a point. Just grab the other end of the pattern, pull it a little bit, and continue this fold all the way to the top until it lays flat, like so. That way, you don't really have to worry about it opening up. You can also put something heavy on top of it, like that, okay? However, one thing you have to be careful for is there should not be an overlap between your cut or an opening, okay? It should just kiss edge to edge. I'll put something heavy here. Then take your side panel, continue the chest line so that you have it going all the way to the edge. Like so. Mark an inch in on your chest line, and now bring the edge of your underarm seam on the side panel against that mark. Bring the chest lines together on the edge and bring that into 0 at the bottom. Use this edge of your pattern as a ruler and mark that new line. If there is a little mismatch maybe on this edge, don't fuss about it. Your new line is going to be correct as long as you have folded your dart correctly. Keep the heavy object on your pattern and cut out this new line. Congratulations, you have successfully displaced your underarm seam forward. Now, when these two go together, the seam is a lot more forward than it was. There is going to be a mismatch around the armhole. Don't worry about that, we'll get to that. Press this flat again, and the dart as well. Careful for the tape. If you're using plastic tape, it will melt. And it's time to now move on to the next alteration, which is going to be straightening the curve on our side panel. What we want to do is to take in the side panel about 1/2 inch on the chest line, like so, and connect that to 0 at the top and the waist. Sometimes you can do this with just a straight ruler, but if I use the straight ruler, it's going to be away from that. So I'll use either freehand or the curved ruler. I prefer to use the curved ruler because it will give a cleaner line and it's easier for you to see in the video. It's almost a straight line, but not quite. And I'm going to cut out this piece, like so. When you cut out this shape, be careful when you get into the suppression area, because what you don't want is to have a line that goes with a flow and then suddenly squares off, goes straight, and then gets jittery around here. It should just look like a smooth flowing line. Now, our side panel will begin to look very strange when this area becomes too thin, but we're going to deal with that later. What we have done here is we have corrected the silhouette of the side panel. However, that 1/2 inch that we removed is not something that we want to reduce the size of the jacket with. We just want to correct the silhouette. So what do? We are going to counter this intake by letting out, in the correct way would be the front underarm seam, the side body underarm seam. So we take away from here and we add it to here. However, because our fabric is not wide enough to allow us to let out this intake on the side panel, we are going to use the front panel. Why? Because these two seams are pretty much in the same area. It doesn't really make a difference whether you do it here or here, at least not when it comes to sizing and the displacement of size. Grab a piece of new paper, perhaps you already have a strip, lay your pattern on. We haven't closed this cut yet. Be careful with it so it doesn't tear. Then, just like we let out the underarm seam on the side panel, bring this close to the edge, have this somewhere in the middle of your strip, trace the base of the armhole, the underarm seam, and stop at the step. Hold the step in place, let out the underarm seam, 1/2 inch on the chest line. So when you measure your chest line and the edge of the pattern to the new edge, that's the distance that you really want. Okay? Hold this in place, put a temporary tape there, flip this over, and tape the straight edge just above the pocket cut. Flip it over, remove, and tape the long edge again. Do not tape past your cut. Now, if I trace my lines for you so that you can see what we've done, this is how it looks like. I've just made a straight step at the base of the armhole. Let's go ahead and cut this out. And when you get to your cut, just lift this up and follow the cut until you have added your new piece and everything looks clean. Let's continue to the next alteration. For this, we're going to need our back panel and again our side panel. We want to correct the silhouette further by this time taking in the side seam on the side panel and on the back. What we are going to do is to mark a quarter on the chest line in from the edge, on the back and the side panel. And we're going to connect that smoothly into 0 at the top of the side seam and the waist. We're going to do this on both of them. I'll use my ruler because it gives a subtle curve and I can make a smooth connection. That's the new line. And as for the side panel, I think this time we can use a perfect straight ruler. All right, maybe I can highlight this a little bit for you so that you can see it better. All right?
Your thimble is your most important tool, yet it's impossible to find a proper one. This is why we created Atlas, the thimble for professional tailors. Made in England, sterling silver, designed to improve your sewing technique. Maximum needle grip, no more brown stains, keeps your finger clean. Order yours today with free shipping.
Now we are reducing a total of ½ inch on the chest line. Let's cut this out. Now, one thing that I want you to pay attention to is that this line is starting to look a little weird. It doesn't flow, it doesn't have any elegance to it, there's no style. So I have to make sure that when I'm cutting this out, I don't have a wobbly line and that it's just a straight, smooth line into the bottom. Here, the line looks a little bit better, it has more flow, it's just a hollow line going into the waist and then going out to the bottom. Now that we have removed this ½ inch from the chest and further corrected the silhouette on the back, we still want to keep the size, just like we did. So we have to counter it again. Now, the correct thing would be to again let this out on the underarm seam of the side panel, but because our fabric is not wide enough, we're going to do this on the front panel. Grab your paper, cut out a strip wide enough, about 2–2.5 inches, like that, and according to the same length that we used to let out the underarm seam the first time. Take your strip, put your underarm seam on it so that the base is midway, the top can go more towards the edge. Trace your line again. Hold the base, let out the top of the underarm seam by ½ inch on the chest line. Flip it over, and tape the long edge again. If I would highlight our new underarm seam, this is what it's going to look like. Okay? So let's cut out our new underarm seam. Again, a straight line at the base of the armhole. We're going to deal with that in a moment. Lift the cut, clean it up, and you're done. Continue the chest line all the way to the edge. That's it. Now you see what I mean with this being very inefficient. Normally, if I know that I'm going to let out this area by ½ inch twice, so 1 inch in total, I'll just put one strip there, measure 1 inch, and do this once, so that I'm not using all this tape and all this paper. But for you to go through it with me step by step, this is necessary. Taking in the waist area on the side panel and the back. Why? Because we wanted to have a little bit more suppression on the sides. Lay them next to each other and make sure that the chest lines are more or less facing each other and the hip lines as well. You have a vent line right here. Roughly lay your ruler on top so that your ruler is more or less parallel to the hip line. Put a line on the side seams to mark your waist. This is the hollowest point of my back, and we want to take in again from the hollowest point of my back. Now, I told you that I want this line to look elegant and this line as well. So I'm going to use my graphite to mark a freehand line so that the silhouette is exactly one smooth line from top to bottom and not like a weird straight line into here and then another straight line. Okay, so what do we do? Well, it's quarter on the double at the waist, so a quarter here and a quarter here, to 0 at the bottom on both and 0 at the top. Okay, let's begin with the back. Actually, to make things easy for you, you can just draw a straight line from that quarter point to the base. That reduces the complexities and the nuances of the curve, and you can just follow along. Do the same on the side panel, like that. Then connect that to the top and do the same on the back. However, this time you do have to use a ruler or freehand. The idea is that you start at 0 and it slowly becomes wider and wider and wider until it meets that quarter intake. It's a very subtle curve. It's too close to the edge and you can't almost see it. Now, when it gets to this area and it comes to a point, just grab your chalk, start a little higher, run it through and go into the other line, and that will automatically give you a smooth transition. It's very easy, like so. Okay? Cut out both lines. That's 1, and that's 2. Now, if you remember, when we did this, and we made this alteration, we reduced material from the waist, which pulled the forepart backwards, like this. What we then did was counter this with a slash and close, so that the forepart moves forward again, like so, and it brings the rest with it closer into my back. Okay? That's going to be our next counter for this intake. Now, we took in a quarter on the double, so that's ½ an inch in total, and we're going to slash and close this by a quarter. There is no relationship between the intake and how much you close. So if you think, oh, quarter on the double, that means quarter intake, so if that was ½ an inch on the double, this would be ½ an inch intake. These measures are not proportionate. You have to assess this during the fitting on the individual, okay? So this is what you're going to do. You're going to slash into your new chest line, which is the one that we remarked. Cut close to the edge, but not all the way in. You're going to mark a quarter from the lower cut edge downwards, and you're going to close by allowing the lower part of the forepart to move below the upper part. Why? This is very important. You don't do it the opposite way. This is our chest line. We want to keep the top the same, and we want to keep this chest line the same. So this chest line is part of the top. When we close, the bottom of the forepart has to go underneath it so that the upper chest line, this upper part chest line, is overlapping, because that's the one that we want to keep. If we would do it the reverse, now this chest line is measuring at a different angle. It's going upwards. It's not going to be parallel to the floor anymore, okay? This is very important. One other point is that you might think, hey, we are closing this by a quarter, but we opened it by 1 inch before, so can we combine the two and just open it 3/4? No, you cannot do that. Why not? Well, this is the amount that we opened, right? This is that 1 inch on the edge. If you would have opened it 3/4, your chest line would not end up where it is right now. Because if you measure, for example, from the neck point or even from the top of the lapel to here, that's one measure. But if you would open it less, that would be a different measure. So your chest line would be at a different angle. This is the correct chest line. You have to keep these two separate, okay? So lift the top up, allow the bottom to fold underneath it, hold it in place, put a temporary tape here, flip it over, and tape the long edge. Turn it around again, and tape this long edge now once more. And once you've done that, you're going to mark that chest line one more time. Cut out the remaining of the tape, and congratulations, you have now correctly closed the forepart. Now, couple of things. This time, we kept the upper part as it should be, and the chest line that we have is perpendicular to the upper part of the forepart, not this one. You see, if I would take my square ruler and I place this against the chest line, that's square along with this upper center front. But if I do the same here, my original center front is deviating from this. And like I said, your center front should always be perpendicular. So which one is the correct one? Well, this is how you should think about it. Because we kept the upper part as it is, and the chest line was part of the upper part, and it was the lower part that moved in, that means that the lower part has to change. Okay, because we wanted to keep the upper part along with its chest line as it is on the body. Okay, so what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to correct this by continuing the center front line of the top all the way to the bottom. And I'm going to scribble away the old center front line so that I don't get confused by it. Now, this is not the only correction that we have to make. We also have to make sure that the hip line and the chest line are parallel, because now the hip line is going inwards while the chest line is going just straight across. We also have to correct the dart, because now the dart is at the same angle as the center front was. The dart is always perpendicular to the chest unless you intentionally put it on an angle. So I'm going to be using this red pencil for the dart because the lines are too close and you're going to get confused, okay? So how are we going to do this? Well, take your square ruler and make sure that the tip of the dart is visible, and align your square ruler with your chest line until you meet the tip of the dart, the top point of the dart. Make sure that this is closed, not taped, just closed, and draw a new center line for your dart. Then we have to mark the new dart legs, which is going to be 1/4 on either side of this center line. At the intake line, which remains the same, mark 1/4 on either side, and the same at the bottom, and connect those two together. And I'm turning my pencil so that it remains sharp all the time. And connect that at the intake point, those new red lines, to the top. You do not have to worry about this waistline. This is just a reference to show us where the hollowest point is, but we're not really going to bother with it during the construction of the garment. However, it is a good idea to change the hip line. And for that, we're going to do something very simple. The side that connects to the side body panel is going to remain in its place, okay? Because if I align these two together and the chest lines continue, the hip lines match. But it's this part that is going upwards. Whatever the measure is from the chest to the hip line on the edge, which is about 13 5/8, you can measure this in centimeters, I'm going to apply the same thing on this other edge. So 13 5/8. And this is going to be my new hip line. And you know what we're going to do? Scribble away the old hip line so that we don't accidentally mark it. You have now successfully slashed and closed the forepart and corrected your center front line according to your actual chest line. You have corrected the dart and your hip line. The pocket remains the same. This pitch mark remains the same. This waistline, you don't even have to think about it. And the opening of your pocket also. You don't have to change the angle of this pocket cut because it's going to go behind the pocket, the patch pocket. It will not be seen, and neither will it have any technical significance to the way your garment is, okay? So let's continue to the next alteration. The next alteration, we're going to deal with the armhole. This looks very strange, but fortunately, we're going to fix that right now. And to do that, we have to add 2 new pieces of paper to the scye of the side panel and the scye of the front panel. So let's go ahead and do that. I have a piece of square left, and I can just fit this right here, because I'm going to be filling in this gap. Put a temporary tape on it, turn it over, and tape the straight edge. Turn it over again, remove. We are going to raise the armhole by 3/8. So that's that. You can measure this if you want to be accurate, but this is exactly 3/8. And we're going to do the same thing on the curve area right here, at the deepest part of the curve. Then we want to connect this at 0, at the top, into this point, into this point. You can freehand this, or you can use one of our curved rulers. And the base should remain more or less straight. Now, I can always go through it with a thicker line, but before I do that, I'm going to do the same on the front panel by letting out the front scye. That makes the cross chest area, so the area between the front scye edge and the center front line, wider. Take your blank paper, mark an area like this, cut it out, temporary tape, turn it over, and tape the curved edge. Now that we've done this, we can go ahead and measure 3/8. This is the edge. I can actually remove this. We can measure 3/8 out from where the front pitch is and 3/8 up from where the base of the scye is. And what we want to do is to connect a curve that is very similar to the armhole from 0 into that mark and curve that into the side body panel. So how are we going to do this? This is very important. You're going to measure a seam in on your chest line. And you're going to draw a dotted line as if that's your sewing line, parallel to the edge of your pattern, from the chest upwards to the upper edge. You're going to do the same thing on the side panel, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to allow them to overlap where the sewing line meets the chest line on both of them, like so, and match the sewing lines together. Once you have that, you can see how you should continue your run. Put something heavy on top, and the best thing you can do is to use some sort of a template, for example, the ruler, just so that you have an idea of what it should look like. Okay, now this looks very pointy, but you can go over it with a piece of chalk and connect it like a smooth line, but keep this base flat and straight. So here we're going to go and curve that smoothly into the top and do the same right here. Smooth curve. It's okay if you deviate slightly from your line into 0 at the base. So if I would highlight this with a red pencil for you to see how the shape is, you should have a very smooth curve, okay? Unfortunately, the white chalk doesn't allow me to draw a line. Mark the lower curve that you have over to the other side so that you can separate them, like this. So what I did was look at where this line is, lift it up, draw it underneath here so that I can then separate them. Tape. If you have to redraw so that you can see well what you're cutting. And cut. So that's the scye, the armhole corrected on the side panel. Now let's tape the front scye. Again, if you have to retrace your line just to see what you're doing, feel free to do that. Clean up the underarm seam, and that's it. Armhole is fixed as much as we can do on the pattern. We are still going to let this out, but on the fabric. So we are actually going to deviate from the pattern line and go into the inlay of the back side, but that happens during construction. We're not going to allow for that right here, okay? So now, when you put your seam lines together and match them at the chest, this is roughly the armhole shape that you're looking for. At the moment, it looks like this. There is one more alteration that is going to close it even further. And if you lay your patterns so that the chest lines are just one straight line, but that the top edge is overlapping sewing line on sewing line, this is what your armhole looks like. So I have aligned the chest lines as one straight line, and I have overlapped the sewing lines only on the top edge, okay? Now, this is what the armhole will look like on my body. Why? Because when the garment is sewn together, the chest line runs like a straight line all around my body, as if I'm a cylinder. But if you want to see how these panels go together during sewing and that you have a smooth curve, you have to follow the angle of the patterns and align the entire sewing line from chest upwards to the edge, okay? But this is not how the armhole is going to be on my body. This is more or less how it's going to be on my body, okay? That's that. Now that we've fixed the armhole, it's time to go ahead and alter the sleeves. For the next alteration, we are going to take in the top sleeve, 1/2 inch at the top of the hindarm, into 0 at the elbow, and we're going to do exactly the same on the undersleeve. Now, in the animation, I showed you how to establish your back pitch line. We already have a pitch line if you have purchased our purple box and are using that pattern. But if you don't have it and you just want to know how to do it on paper, this is how it goes. You measure a seam inwards from the edge of your pattern. So that's 3/8. And you're going to just mark a dotted line. You're also going to measure a seam downwards, following the edge of the curve that you have here, like that. Where those sewing lines intersect, you are going to draw a straight line, a straight horizontal line that is parallel to your chest line. And that is your back pitch construction line. It's actually a little bit higher than the original pattern, but you can ignore the one on the pattern, just go with whatever the seam is, okay? So once you've done that and you've established your line, you can remove your sewing lines and you can start taking in. We are going to take in 1/2 inch. That means grab your ruler, measure 1/2 inch in. I use the straighter side and the bend is the elbow right here. Connect that smoothly into 0 at the elbow. Once you've done that, you have to know what to do with this curve. This curve can ruin the entire way that your sleeve hangs, so you have to be careful. How do you do it? Well, since you have established your horizontal construction line and you know that this is going to be the new edge of your hindarm, you're going to measure again 3/8 inwards from your new edge. 3/8. Again, I'll use this red pencil. So that's 3/8 in. Now, where your sewing line of the hindarm intersects with the horizontal construction line of your back pitch, you're going to take a line and roughly angle that into the top right here. So, okay? Then you're going to move a seam upwards along the same angle, which is exactly the same angle that you have here, more or less. And you're going to mark that as the new edge of your pattern. That means that this is going to go smoothly into here. And because the top pitch, therefore, also moves 1/2 inch forward, because you've taken it in here, this run has to move slightly forwards as well. But first, let's focus on here. So, I'm going to cut out the new hindarm edge. Where my hindarm sewing line intersects with the edge of the pattern, so not the sewing line of the pattern. Hindarm sewing line, sleeve run edge, not the seam. Okay? I'll mark a step, like so. That's why some patterns have a step there and people think it's a dodgy pattern. But the sewing line is what matters. Make a smooth curve. Let me use chalk. Curve that into that step, okay? Mark a step there. Whether there is a step or not and I just continue, doesn't matter. What you have to know is where your sewing lines are. So here we have the sewing line of the hind arm. Here we have the sewing line of the top of the sleeve run, and they intersect at the back pitch construction line, and that is what matters. So let's get rid of these dirty sewing lines. Now the sleeve looks a little pointy, and this angle hasn't been corrected. Our top pitch has moved 1/2 inch inwards, which we have to mark. We're going to grab our ruler, and we're going to mark 1/2 inch in for the top of the sleeve. Now this pitch mark is not supposed to match anything. This is just to tell us where the highest point of the sleeve should be, okay? Now let's correct this curve. Grab your blank paper, put your pattern on top, and what we need is a strip that follows roughly the same shape as our sleeve, maybe 1 inch away from the edge and 1 inch inwards, so about 2 inches, like this. Cut this out. Trace your sleeve around the forearm seam and this entire line all the way to the top. Mark where your old top pitch is. Move your new top pitch onto that line and angle the base of your top sleeve run into the curve that you have. That gives you this little slither, this little amount of extra sleeve, because you have taken away some fabric from here and you don't want the top of the sleeve to end up tight. Temporary tape, turn it over and tape this long edge. That's that. Tape over the curved edge and cut it out. Start with the forearm, cut your step, and the rest of the new line. Now, despite the fact that you've taken in the top sleeve, the top part of the crown is not tight, okay? It still has sufficient room to wrap itself around the armhole. Make sure you mark your new top pitch again on top of the tape so that it's visible, and your front pitch remains where it is. Scribble away the old top pitch so you don't get confused. And this is the top sleeve taken in correctly. Now we have to take in the hind arm of the undersleeve correctly. So what do? Just cut out a straight strip of 2 inch wide and make sure that it's long enough to cover the top and halfway this curve, like so. Temporary tape, turn it over and tape the long edge. Turn it over again and mark 1/2 inch inwards at the very top of your hind arm. So that's at the very top, 1/2 inch in. Then I want you to take your top sleeve pattern, match the chest lines, so flip this over so that the chest lines are matching, and get the top of your sleeve to align with this 1/2 inch intake and bring that into 0 at the elbow. Draw your new line and cut that out. And this might sound silly, but I'll still mention it. The reason why I use this hind arm is because these two are going to be sewn eventually together, not just because this happens to have a convenient curve. You know, it's not like I decide to take the front edge pattern because the lapel has a convenient curve and I use it. I can do that, but it's a silly thing to do. So whenever you're dealing with seams that have to go together during construction, use them as guides for one another. Now that we have taken in the top hind arm of the undersleeve, we are going to true our sleeve run. Truing means that you connect the patterns on the seams that will go together as if they are sewn together, so that one run goes smoothly into the other. Of course, when you have then sewn the patterns together, you don't have to correct your run. So mark a seam inwards on both chest lines and mark a seam inwards at the top of the sleeve, at the top of the top sleeve hind arm, like that, and the same for the undersleeve. This can be roughly, okay? Then align your chest lines on that seam off point. So seam off, that point matches. Do the same right here at the top. So now that matches. Put something heavy on your sleeve pattern so that they don't move. And then with a piece of chalk perhaps, or graphite, whatever you want to use, go from the top sleeve into the undersleeve. We don't go from the undersleeve into the top sleeve and remove that. Why? Well, because it is the back pitch location of the top sleeve that is the most visible and easiest to identify, that determines the hang of your sleeve. Okay? So that's why. So start a little bit further, go into there, and then just trail that smoothly into 0 where the curve begins, at the base of the curve, like that. Okay? If I would highlight it for you with a black line, this is what it looks like. Remove your top sleeve, tape over the edge of your pattern, and cut out that new piece. You could have a step here and cut this point away until the distance here is about 3/8, because that will indicate that this is the seam allowance that you're looking for. But what matters really is not the outer edges of your pattern. It is whether or not you know where your sewing lines are. So if we take a seam off here and we take a seam off here, this point is where the back pitch is going to be. All right? And that's what you should prioritize. It is time to go ahead and let out the hind arms at the cuff and the elbow on the double. So both the top sleeve and the undersleeve. For that, we need a new strip of paper. Perhaps flip it over so you can mark the same shape that your sleeve has, because it needs to be as long as the sleeve is, and give that a width of 2 inches so you have enough to play with, and cut another one because you're going to need it for your undersleeve as well. Then start with your top sleeve. Put it on your strip and draw a line from roughly below the chest line all the way to the cuff, and just follow the shape of the hind arm. Somewhere between the cuff and the chest line, that's where your elbow is going to be, okay? Move your pattern inwards so that lets out the cuffs and the elbows by 1/4, and put a temporary tape there. Here, here, and here. Turn it over and tape the long edge. Turn it over again. Remove. Take your long ruler or your undersleeve pattern. Fade this line into 0 at the top. I'm just matching the steps at the top, FYI. That's it. We have now let out the elbow and the cuff by about 1/4. Tape over it and cut it out. Make sure you mark your vent. That's that. Now, do exactly the same on the undersleeve. And if you want to curve that into 0, you can now use the hind arm of your top sleeve as a ruler. Turn it over, tape the wrong edge. And now connect the top of your hind arm for the undersleeve to the elbow that you've let out 1/4 by using the hind arm of the top sleeve. Like so. Tape over it and cut out. Mark your vent. Clean up the rest. And that is successfully letting out the cuff and the elbow 1/4 on the double to 0 at top.
Your thimble is your most important tool. Yet, it's impossible to find a proper one. This is why we created Atlas, the thimble for professional tailors. Made in England, sterling silver, designed to improve your sewing technique. Maximum needle grip, no more brown stains, keeps your finger clean. Order yours today with free shipping.
Now let's move on to the next alteration, which is going to be correcting the curve at the base of the undersleeve. Grab your forepart and your side panel. Align them so that the chest lines run through like a straight line. Seam off the top edges of the underarm seam, and while the chest lines are aligned, align the sewing lines at the top, like I taught you, so that we can see how the armhole would be on the body, when the garment is on the body. If we take our undersleeve and lay this against our armhole so that the edge right here is just below the back pitch, maybe by ½ an inch or so, doesn't really matter, as long as you've just connected this point and this point to the armhole. Now, whether you do it like this or whether you do it like this at this moment is not relevant. Just try to keep it vertically aligned so that these two straight lines are more or less together. You'll notice a gap. That gap is about what we call a good quarter, or a bare 3/8. That just means a centimeter that's just a little bit smaller than a centimeter, but I'll just see that as a centimeter, 3/8, okay? What we have to do is to fill in this area on the undersleeve curve so that it matches the base of the armhole. Otherwise, this would have to be pulled upwards when we are sewing the sleeve, and that's gonna reduce the amount of cloth that could be taken up when we are raising our arms, okay? So, what do you have to do? Well, I'll mark a point right here on the undersleeve, just to know this is right on the edge of this square. And one roughly here, so that I know between which 2 points I have to fill that in. Then remove your side panel and your front panel. Take out a piece of paper that you've kept, like that. Maybe I should do it like this so that you can see better what we're doing. Temporary tape, flip it over, tape the straight edge. Flip it over, remove the temporary tape, and raise the deepest point of this curve by 3/8, like so. Curve that smoothly into that straight line, like that, and somewhere here. So we go from here, deviate into that, and make that a straighter curve. So it's still a curve, but it's a lot straighter. I could even get it lower so that I have a complete straight edge. That is also okay. If I would highlight that for you, tape this and cut it out. This is how it looks like. Again, if I was doing this on my own without it being filmed, that strip that I added to true the top sleeve into the undersleeve, I would have just let this out as well to create that run, okay? Now, if you take your top sleeve pattern and you mark a seam in on the undersleeve chest line, seam in on the top sleeve chest line, and you continue this up to the step as if there is a sewing line there, and you match them together all the way to the edge. Maybe I should do it reverse so that you can see it better. You can see that this curve goes smoothly into the top sleeve. Now this step, of course, is distorting our view, but it's something like this, okay? And you need to have, this can't be too small. If this is too scooped and too narrow, when your armpit goes in there, it's gonna push everything to the side and it's gonna distort the entire thing. What you want for the undersleeve is to be as high as possible at the base, but also as wide as possible. But don't go all the way square like that, okay? You do need cloth to be taken up when you're moving your arm. So everything is matching, no problems at all. Let's continue to the next alteration, which is going to be the refinement that we did on the underarm seam. Take your front panel and your side panel. We are going to let out this suppression, the hollowest point, by about 1/8 from 0 at the top, 1/8 here in the middle, and 0 again at the hip. And then we're going to use this as a ruler to flip it over and do the same right here. Grab a strip, doesn't need to be very long as it's up to your hip line and about 2 inches wide. Cut that out. Put your pattern on top so that it's halfway the strip, halfway at the top. Temporary tape, flip, tape the long edge, remove the temporary tape. Where the hollowest point is, mark 1/8 outwards, grab your ruler, try to find the point where this crosses the ruler and the ruler is matching the edge of the pattern, which is roughly here, and draw a line. You can also freehand this if you want. Then tape over it and cut it out. Just make sure that you have a smooth transition from this new line into the underarm seam. Don't give me any squares or dimples or whatever. Now, for some reason, it looks like I have a kink here. And I don't like that. So I'll try to reduce that by using my ruler. It's this little bit right here. And I'll just continue the line at the bottom as well. This 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter intake is not going to be a problem in terms of sizing. That looks a bit smoother. Now we're going to do the same on the front panel. However, for the front panel, we're going to need a longer strip because we're going to close our dart, the new dart lines, and do the same thing that we did when we were displacing the seam by closing this, and we are also going to have to correct this dip right here. Okay, so mark the length of your strip all the way to the bottom. Give it about 2.5 inches, 3 inches of width. Fold your left dart leg, the one that is close to the side, and that's the new dart leg. Bring it together to the other one. You might struggle a bit with the thickness right here. That's why you need a thinner paper. And fold this up. And it's okay if it's not laying flat. I mean, you can only do your best, but bring the dart legs as close as you can together. That's the main thing. Put a heavy object on it. Can you see how this goes into a smooth curve, but then here there is a dodgy break? You want this to just continue smoothly. So what do we do? Well, take your strip, put it underneath here, and put some temporary tape on it. On the hollowest point, mark 1/8 outwards, because we're letting this out on the double. Then grab your side panel, flip it over, match the chest lines, make sure that the edges of the pattern are matching edge to edge, then move this over to this 1/8 mark, like that. Draw a line. We're making these seams as similar as possible, but we can't just match top and bottom because that would add way too much fabric here. Then, from your new suppression point, turn this over to 0 at bottom and mark the rest. Like so. And as you can see, we have corrected this little bit by adding a bit to it, okay? It's not going to give us any problems. So, flip this over, tape the long edge, along with the cut that you have, along with the pocket cut. Flip it over again, tape the long edge, and cut out your new underarm seam. And we have now a very smooth curve right here. What you have to do now is to cut through your pocket cut, open it up. If you don't have any tapes here, feel free to press it flat, and the top edge right here as well. Your pattern might wobble a bit, but that's not really a big problem. Okay, and now you can put a tape through your pocket cut so that it remains closed. And when you're taping this closed, make sure that there are no gaps between it or overlaps. Mark the cut, and make sure you also Mark your dart legs, and off you go. I always put a small tape right in this corner because this can catch something and it can rip. So that gives it more strength. Now that we've refined our underarm seam, it's time to do the alteration on the side panel. And that was the alteration whereby we closed the top into 0 at the chest. Mark out roughly a square up to the chest line, like this, and cut out the square. Make sure it covers the entire upper part of the scye, and just put a tape right through it at the back. Grab your ruler and measure from the edge of your side seam 1 inch inwards. Then what I want you to do is to create a curve that starts at 0, where the chest line is, and goes into this point. You can use a ruler if you want. This is how your curve should look like. Mark a seam in. This is the top of your side seam. And connect this like a smooth curve, almost straight-ish, downwards into the deepest point of your curve. Again, you can use a ruler for this and connect the rest freehand. Now, tape over it and cut it out. To understand what this alteration does, you have to think of the back panel and the side panel as 2 panels that come together like a square. Okay? This is the side panel, this is the back panel. Okay? So, side panel is like this, back panel is like this. Like this. Okay? This seam is attached to this seam. It's a bit difficult to do this, of course, but when you attach these two, like a milk carton, and you have a curve on the top here, this pulls the back into a curve as well. Okay? Like that. And if you have big blades, you're going to have a shape that protrudes the back here and goes in on the sides. This helps to bring the back slightly inwards like this. On top of that, what I've done on the fabric during the construction is ease in the upper part of the back side seam onto the side seam of the side panel. And you know what a gather does? It creates a little volume on the surface of that panel, okay? But that's something we're gonna do during construction. Now that we have this in front of us, I also want to take a look at the armhole. Remember, we marked or remarked the pitch marks on both our front panel and our back panel. The front pitch moved upwards by 1/4 of an inch, like so. And the back pitch moved upwards by 1/2 an inch. Now scribble away the old pitch marks so that you don't get distracted. But the idea is that when you lay the patterns on top of each other and you allow the chest lines to run through like a straight line, like so, and you allow these runs to flow into one another, what you should do is to measure the side depth of your jacket, because you still have a basted version. In our case, it was about 6 1/4. So 6 1/4 from the base gives us this height for our side depth. Now, if we split that in half, so 3 1/8, that gives us half the armhole, which is usually where the top of the side seam is. We are maybe a little bit off, but that's really not a problem. It's not really necessary to fix this. And then half that, so that means 1.5 inches, gives us the position for our back pitch, which is what we have right now, right here. And half that gives us the position of our front pitch. Now, When you do that, you'll notice that your front pitch is in the right place. Your back pitch, however, is slightly off. Why is that? Well, when we measured our armhole and we marked our pitch marks, this was based on an armhole that had gone through manipulations. The fabric was gathered and stretched in some areas, but the paper pattern is not. So what I'm giving you here is a starting point formula. You should start with these positions for your pitch marks, but always measure the armhole during construction because that will give you the most accurate reading. So front pitch matches pretty much as the formula says. Halfway is going to be the top of the side seam, but we have also changed our armhole a little bit, so that influences that because we have raised it. And the back pitch goes according to the old one, but the new one is about ½ an inch higher. And again, the final marking of your pitch marks should always be double checked and done on the armhole of the garment, because when you gather around here in this area, it might influence the armhole, okay? So, new back pitch, new front pitch. It's time to do our 2 last markings. Because this is going to be made up and lining is going to go into the back panels, and there's going to be pocket bags and pockets on the fronts, there's going to be a facing, linings, all of that extra material is going to reduce the amount of space that we have inside the garment. So to prevent that build up on the inside, to make the jacket tighter, what we are going to do is to let out the entire side seam of the back and the entire underarm seam of the front by just 3 millimeters. That's small enough to accommodate for that decrease in the size inside the garment, but also small enough to not really make a change in the sizing of the garment from the outside. So grab your paper, and we are going to need a strip that is going to be as long as the entire side seam. So that also includes the back side. So like that. Cut that out. Grab your strip, take your side body panel, and make sure that it's being covered by the strip from the bottom all the way to the top. Then trace the step and the side seam. Slightly move the panel over so that you're letting the side seam out, and make sure that the 3 millimeters that you've added is the same from top all the way to the bottom. So you have just a 3 millimeter strip going from top to bottom, like that. Temporary tape, turn it over, and tape the entire straight edge. Turn it over again. And what I want you to do is to take your ruler, just your straight ruler, and the step that you've drawn here should remain 3/8. From this point, I want you to connect and go into 0 at the corner of the shoulder, the point of the shoulder, like that. Tape the entire thing and cut it out. That's the back done. Now we have to do the underarm seam of the front. Again, grab your piece of paper, cut out a strip, and make sure that the strip is covering, again, the front all the way from the bottom to the top of the side of this front panel. Trace the front curve of the front side and the underarm seam over the step around the hip. Move it over so that you can see a strip of 3 millimeters on the side here. Temporary tape. Flip it over. Tape the straight edge. Flip it over again. Connect this amount that you've let out here into 0 at the shoulder end, like that. Tape over the entire thing and cut it out. So, and that's our front panel also let out for construction purposes. So not really for the fit, though you could say it's for the fit, but not really to make the fit any bigger for me visually. Now, one last thing, extremely important, make sure you go over any area where you have a line that is covered by tape. We still need to mark one other thing which we haven't done. That is the position of our brake line as it would be on the jacket. How can we find out? Well, because you haven't gone through the alterations that I've done on this pattern on the jacket, I should give you that number. So this is how we do it. We take our jacket and we unpick the color so that we can do this. Then we mark a chalk line exactly where the brake line is of the color. Now, if you remember, we sometimes deviate to make sure that this transitions smoothly into the lapel. Once you've made that chalk line, you can remove the color in that area and measure from your neck point a seam off where that line is that you have drawn. So in this case, it's 3/8 over from the front neck point. Normally, I said the brake line is 1.25 inches over from the neck point. But during construction, for the smooth transitions purpose, we have deviated from that, and that has brought us to a brake line of 3/8 away from the neck point. So 3/8 is what I want you to measure on your new pattern. You're going to grab your 4-part, you're going to grab your long ruler, seam off the shoulder seam, and then 3/8 in front of that. Make sure your pattern is not moving. Connect that as a line into your first button, like so. Or you can use a darker line. I think I ripped through the paper. I'll just put a piece of tape behind that for protection. So now, scribble away the original brake line, the one that we had already on the printed pattern. And now forget about all the rules that the brake line should be always 1.25 inches over. This is the new brake line, this black line. And you could say that technically, if you follow the rules, now from this brake line, if you move 1.25 inches over, that would be your correct neck point. Yes, on construction. On paper, no. Why and what is the difference? This brake line position is the consequence of many complex shapings around the shoulder area, okay? First of all, we have hollowed the front shoulder, then we have stretched it, then we have stretched the neck point, then we have done the same on the back shoulder, then we have joined them, and all of that has changed the orientation of the brake line, okay? But we know that when we put this pattern together and we stick to the original neck point that we have, and we go through the same manipulations on the fabric, the most likely area for our brake line to end is going to be on this line, okay? That's all you need to know. Now, lapel width. From the top of the lapel, you're going to measure 1.25 inches in. From the new brake line that we have marked, you're going to measure 4.25 inches over. That's going to be here. And you can use your curved ruler with the rounder side at the bottom to mark your lapel shape with a slight belly. So now our lapel measures 4.25 inches. Now, one other thing you have to understand is the lapel is going to be sitting high, low, and you have to understand how to determine its height. When you have a fitted garment in front of you, you can just look at it. The original gorge line of the lapel is somewhat here. You can draw a chalk line through that, like so. And as you have your undercollar on, you can roughly mark out the shape that you're going to have to see how big your collar area is going to be. For now, I want you to just stick to the original markings of the line. It's going to be 2 inches downwards from the shoulder seam. Now, what if you don't have a garment? How can you then calculate that? Well, it's very simple. Just fold your lapel along the brake line that you have, your most recent brake line, like this. Also, mark a seam off the front shoulder. Then you can measure, this is about 2.5 on paper pattern. I can always increase it higher, but because we have inlay there, I don't really have to do that. It's not really a problem at this moment. But this does give you an opportunity to see what your color shape is going to look like. So you can just roughly draw out a color, and you can see that, okay, this is too small, this is too angled, whatever. That's how you do it. But for now, just follow along, as I don't want you to think about too many elements at once. Now that we have our break line, it's good to take a look at the position of the out breast welt. Normally, it's good to balance this so that this is not too far in, but you can always fold the lapel back and see how much of this breast pocket you can see. We're going to take a seam off the front side for the sleeve, so that leaves us about an area of 1.25 inches between the sleeve and the pocket, and here it's going to be very close to the break line. I prefer to have this slightly more towards the armhole to keep clear from the break line, because the pocket bag of this out breast is going to interfere with the break line that we have. So how do we do this? Well, it's fairly simple. I'm going to mark this with a red pencil. Take your ruler, same angle as the out breast welt, continue the line, mark your seam off on the edge so that you know what you're doing. Measure between the sewing line of the armhole and your break line, roughly halfway through this pocket, and that gives us about 7 inches. So that's going to be 3.5. That's going to be the middle point of the pocket. The pocket itself is about 4 3/4, so that divided by 2 is going to be 2 3/8. Here is one end of the pocket. Here is another end of the pocket. You can just follow along the same angle as the previous line. And the width of the pocket is going to be 1 1/8 inches. Now the distance is a little bit more balanced. We can see a bit more of the pocket. So if you have a pocket square in there, you can actually show that off. And we have enough room for our pocket bag to sit there flat without interfering with the break line. Okay? So let me just remove any excess lines. And again, I'll scribble away the lines that I don't need so that I don't get confused. Now, normally when you have altered the pattern like this, you would take all of your new panels, trace them on a clean piece of paper so that you don't have all of this Frankenstein going on, and move on. But there's also going to be plenty of times where you're not going to do that. I'm just going to use this pattern moving on to module 2, and I think that you will do exactly the same. But feel free to trace this onto a new piece of clean paper if you have any, and make sure that you don't mark the old lines that are not necessary anymore. So, and that's our alterations done on paper. Once you've made all the changes to your paper patterns, I want you to double check the seams and how they transition from one to the other. This process is extremely important, and it's called the truing phase of pattern cutting. So, there's a couple of things that I want you to check. For example, if you would take the front panel and the back panel, and you would mark a seam off the back neck point's shoulder, so seam off the back shoulder at the neck point, and seam off the back shoulder at the back side. Do the same on the front. Seam off the front neck and the front shoulder. Seam off the front shoulder and the front side. And you would put these two together, match them. Is your pattern moving smoothly from one to the other? Okay? Now, of course, during construction, you can correct many things. But what you always should do is to make sure that you have a smooth transition. For example, here, this is going into a point and then it's bowing slightly outwards. What I would do is to take my ruler and see if I can match my ruler, or maybe the long ruler, to create a smoother run. Maybe hollow out that area a little bit. If I would cut that out, I'll get a slightly smoother run. Okay, now, of course, we're going to stretch these shoulders, we're going to hollow them, change the surface shape. That is going to affect all of this to some extent. But on paper pattern, you should always be conscious of this and do your best to get the best runs possible. Again, for example, I have so much bulk here that this area is not super smooth. So what I could do, I can hollow this out into 0. Now this gives me a slightly smoother run. This is all very 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, but I'm saying this because I want you to be aware of it, okay? As long as you're conscious of it. Same goes for the front neck. This should be a smooth transition. It should not look like this, or like this, or like this, where it comes to a point, or like this, where it has a sudden interruption. If you have that, you should correct it, and you should do it so consciously, okay? This should remain in the same place. If there is a weird gap or a weird cut, just add some paper, fill that in, or remove that. But as long as it looks like this, you're fine. Then you have your side body panel. So if you take your back and your side panel and you take a seam off on the chest line, make a hole in it so that you can see it from the other side. And you have your chest line on the back. Again, mark a seam off. When you place these two dots on top of each other, and you go and you go and you walk the pattern, as they say, your sewing lines should be exactly in the same point. If this is higher and you end up like this, or it's lower, you should correct one of them, and probably that's going to be the side body panel. Or if you go downwards, when you overlay these and you walk the pattern, it should more or less fit smoothly into one another, and more or less match at the base. Now, sometimes if it's a little bit off, like 1 or 2 millimeter, that's perfectly fine for now. But when you go more towards advanced stages, you should always correct it. I'm not gonna ask you to correct it if you don't have big differences. But if there's a big difference, more than 2 or 3 millimeters, make sure that you correct it. And the way you would correct it is to do the same thing again. So for example, hip line, seam off, seam off the bottom, allow them to overlap, and see if this is just continuing smoothly. So at the moment, for example, there is this straight line and then it goes into a blip. I could remove this and make it smooth by just taking about 2 millimeters away. I'm not going to do that at this moment because it's not worth it and I don't want to confuse, but I want you to be aware of it, okay? Same goes with the sleeves. We have done this already with the sleeves, but just to highlight again, seam off the chest line, seam off the top edge. Do you have a smooth transition right here? It should not be like this, it should not be like this, it should not be like this, okay? The same goes for the back, seam off, seam off. Do you have a smooth transition from the top sleeve into the undersleeve? All right? So, we are done with making all the alterations on our paper pattern. We are officially at the end of Module 1 for our traditional model. Thank you for making it this far. What was it like? Do you still enjoy the idea of tailoring and going through all these changes and all this handwork? Was it fun? Was it confusing? Please let me know. Just comment, give your honest opinion about how you experienced Module 1. I also hope that I gave you enough relevant information in this lesson on how to potentially improve the fit of your personal garments. I mean, this is only the tip of the iceberg. If you want to see more, that's going to happen in Module 4. We are going to have an indexed library of every possible alteration that you can make on every possible seam on a jacket, okay? And that's going to be a big, big library. Now, I also want to thank a few people for this project. First of all, Rafał Pobudkowski for gifting me this beautiful handmade shirt made by himself. My good friends, Kimberly Lawton and Matthew Gonzalez, for encouraging me to get on with the work and produce these videos. But also, most importantly, the person who's always been with me during all these recordings, my beautiful, beloved Mowgli, behind the camera, making funny faces. Now, we are going to bring all the things that we have learned in this module onto Module 2. which is the next module, and we're gonna finish this jacket. By the end of module 2, you will know how to finish a jacket without any help, and that's gonna really increase your opportunities not only to perhaps start a business for yourself, but also be employed at professional tailoring workshops. One thing I would like to say is that it's extremely important for us if you subscribe. Because when you subscribe, our channel grows. When our channel grows, we gain credibility. When we have more credibility, we have more access to resources, which in turn will allow us to produce better videos. Guys, if you've been following our videos and you've learned from them, please subscribe. This is not a political channel, so nobody's gonna think you're some weirdo supporting some weird politician or whatsoever. This is just pure skills crafts channel. Thank you for your patience and also following the videos and, well, helping us with every dream that we have made a reality so far. I know it takes us a long time to produce these videos, but without you, really, they would be meaningless. As for now, my name is Reza, Mowgli behind the camera, and we look forward to see you in Module 2. Take care.